The morning fog clung to the edges of Ashwood like an old secret, one that refused to be spoken aloud. It wound its fingers through the town's narrow streets, shrouding the houses and the cobbled roads in a soft, oppressive silence. The faint sound of distant church bells rang through the mist, their chimes slow and deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. A chill clung to the air, and the world seemed to hold its breath. I stepped off the bus with the weight of the past pressing down on my shoulders. The small town sprawled before me, quaint, picturesque even, but there was an undercurrent of unease that made my skin crawl. I hadn't been back since Jamie had disappeared a week ago, and the sense of dread in the air was almost palpable. The kind of dread that settled in your bones and refused to leave. Ashwood was a town stuck between worlds, old with its centuries-old brick buildings and cobblestone streets, and yet not quite of the past. The people who lived here, from the shopkeepers to the churchgoers, all wore a layer of quiet that seemed to stretch back generations. There was a deep-rooted sense of history here, but it was the kind of history one didn't speak of. The kind of history that lived in the corners of rooms and in the whispered warnings of the old-timers. The sun had barely broken through the mist as I made my way down the main street, my boots clicking sharply on the damp pavement. The town felt like a stage, silent, eerie, its very streets frozen in a kind of half-life. There were no children playing, no laughter drifting from open windows. Instead, there was the hum of wind brushing against old wood, the faint murmur of voices in the distance, muted and wary. My stomach twisted as I glanced around, searching for any clue, anything that might hint at the disappearance of Jamie, my younger sibling, the person I had sworn to protect. The search had been a blur of missed opportunities and dead ends. People had barely noticed. The town had barely reacted. No one seemed to care. As the days stretched on, my frustration turned to something darker, something desperate. I reached the old cafe on the corner of the square, a place that had once been a favorite haunt for both Jamie and me. The faded neon sign flickered weakly, its warm glow fighting against the coldness of the town. I pushed the door open, the bell above it ringing sharply, like the last remaining thread of something familiar. Inside, the cafe was dim, but the smell of stale coffee and the lingering traces of baked goods hung in the air. Behind the counter, a woman with thin gray hair and a worn face barely looked up as I entered. Her eyes flickered for just a moment before returning to the cracked mug she was wiping. "You're not from around here," she said in a voice like dry leaves rustling. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. I nodded, ignoring the chill that ran up my spine. "I'm looking for someone, my sibling, Jamie Harper. Have you seen them?" The woman set the mug down with a soft thud, her wrinkled hands lingering on the porcelain. "A lot of people come and go around here," she said slowly, as though weighing each word. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and she leaned forward. "Some disappeared during the festival. Always around this time of year. They don't come back." The mention of the festival sent a shiver through me. The Harvest Festival, always celebrated with great fanfare in Ashwood, as if the town were trying to mask something darker beneath the celebration. People spoke of it with reverence, but there was something about the way they spoke that made my skin crawl. The festival was a time when the town's pulse quickened, when it became alive with something more than just tradition. "And Jamie? Was Jamie involved?" I asked, my voice low but insistent. My heart raced, my mind scrambling for any thread of information. The woman's eyes darted over my shoulder, as if looking for someone. "I don't know. You should leave. It's better that way. Some things you can't unsee." Her voice trembled at the edges, and she abruptly turned away, wiping the counter once again, I stood there, the weight of her words sinking into my gut. It felt like a warning, a cryptic message wrapped in a trembling hand. But what was she so afraid of? And why was everyone in Ashwood so determined to remain silent? I felt eyes on me as I stepped out of the cafe and into the misty streets again. But when I glanced around, there was no one in sight. Just the stillness, the weight of the town's oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. I had heard the rumors, seen the strange glances, but something about the woman's words made it all real. People disappeared here. My pulse quickened. The town had moved on, but I couldn't. Jamie was still out there, lost in the shadows of this strange, isolated place. And I would be damned if Ashwood's secrets kept me from finding the truth. The church bell tolled again, its echo reverberating through the fog. The harvest festival was coming, and someone was waiting for Jamie. For me. The search for my sibling had only just begun, but I knew that the road ahead would lead me into something far darker than I could imagine. The fog hadn't lifted by the time I reached the local police station. The air was thick, suffocating, and as I walked up the stone steps, an overwhelming sense of foreboding settled around me. The building itself looked like something ripped from another time. Its small, grimy windows and cracked brick facade told a tale of years gone by, a relic slowly crumbling beneath the weight of its own secrets. Inside, the smell of old wood and stale paperwork clung to the air, a stagnant silence broken only by the occasional shuffle of boots or the soft tap of a pen. There was a stillness here, as though even the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Detective Moore sat behind a cluttered desk, his brow furrowed as he stared at a file that had long since gone cold. When he noticed me standing in the doorway, his tired eyes flicked to mine, softening for just a moment before he went back to his work. He didn't stand up. His face was weathered, grizzled. A man who had spent his life unraveling other people's darkness, but never his own. "Harper," Moore muttered, his voice low and rough, like gravel scraping against metal. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you, it's not safe." I didn't wait for an invitation. My gaze never left his. "I'm not leaving, Moore, not until I find Jamie." He let out a long sigh, one that seemed too tired to carry much weight, as if he had already resigned himself to the fact that there was no stopping me. But I could see it in his eyes, a mixture of caution and resignation. He knew it was pointless to argue. "I can't help you," Moore said, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "Not in the way you want me to. People around here have their own ways of dealing with things. You start digging into this, you'll end up just like your sister, vanished without a trace." His words cut deeper than I had expected, and I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. "I'm already deep in this, Moore. I'm not turning back." "What is the Black Veil? What do you know about them?" Moore froze, his pen stilled mid-tap. His face hardened, eyes narrowing as if he were testing me, deciding how much of the truth to share. Finally, he leaned forward, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "You're asking about them now, huh? You think you're ready for the truth?" He scoffed softly, shaking his head. "The Black Veil is not what people think it is. It's not just a group of lunatics wearing cloaks and chanting in the woods. It's older than that. Much older." He paused, his eyes flickering toward the window, as if expecting someone to overhear. But the room was empty, save for the low murmur of voices in the hall. His gaze returned to me, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. "I've seen things I can't explain. I've tried to bury it all, pretend it's not real, but it is, and you don't want to go any further down this road." My heart pounded. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest, the weight of his words sinking in. The Black Veil. It wasn't just some whispered name of fear. It was something ancient, something festering beneath the surface, something no one dared speak about. What are they, Moore? Who are they, really? I pressed, my voice barely a whisper now. Moore glanced around once more, then slowly slid a manila folder across the desk toward me. The edges were frayed and yellowed with age. I opened it, my fingers trembling, and inside were photographs, grainy, old. The first one made my stomach lurch. It was a picture of the town square, but the people in it weren't quite right. Their faces were blurred, their features distorted, like the camera had captured their true selves slipping out of the human form. Symbols were scrawled in the margins, cryptic, unfamiliar. The next photo was worse, an old church on the edge of town. Its doors were cracked open, as though waiting for something to enter. But in the shadows of the doorway stood figures, cloaked in black. Their hoods obscured their faces, but their postures were unnaturally rigid, like statues caught mid-motion. These were taken during the Harvest Festival, about 20 years ago, Moore said, his voice distant. People think the festival's just a tradition. A little parade, some music, a chance for the town to celebrate the harvest. But it's not. It's the time when they make their sacrifices. Who? I asked, my voice hoarse. Who do they sacrifice? Moore didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured to the photographs, his eyes dark with something I couldn't place. Regret, maybe, or fear. This town isn't what it seems, Harper. The Black Veil isn't a cult, it's a congregation. A collective, if you will. They worship something much older than anything we can understand. Eldritch forces, something beyond our world, and every year they perform a ritual to keep those forces at bay, to keep them from breaking free. My blood ran cold. My mind raced to make sense of it all. What does this have to do with Jamie? Moore finally met my gaze, his eyes full of something dark. Every year, someone is chosen. Someone vanishes, disappears during the festival, just like your sister. The Black Veil believes it's necessary to feed the Ancient Ones, to keep their power bound. They don't kill for pleasure, they kill for survival. They have to make the sacrifice. Otherwise, well, you don't want to know what happens if they stop. The room seemed to close in around me, the weight of his words pressing down like a heavy hand. I felt sick, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, each one more horrifying than the last. Jamie, I whispered, the realization cutting through me like a shard of ice. She wasn't taken by accident, she was chosen. Moore didn't answer. He stood up, his chair scraping sharply against the floor. You need to leave, Harper. You're asking questions no one should ask. People here don't talk about the Black Veil. They don't talk about what happens during the festival. And you're not going to get the answers you're looking for. Not without consequences. I stood there, trembling, as I closed the folder. The truth was suffocating, but I wouldn't back down. Not now. Not when Jamie's life was at stake. I'm not afraid of them, I said, my voice steady with resolve. And I'm not leaving, not until I know what happened to Jamie. Moore's expression softened for a brief moment, but only for a second. Then you'll understand why you should have stayed away. The rain had begun to fall in soft, steady sheets as I made my way out of the police station. The air had shifted, now thick and damp with the promise of something more. Something lingering just beyond the edge of every gust of wind. Ashwood, so serene just hours ago, had grown darker, more oppressive, as if the very earth beneath my feet had begun to shift in rhythm with the ancient forces lurking beneath the surface. Every step I took felt like a challenge, as though the town itself was silently urging me to turn back, to give up my search for the truth that I knew I had to uncover. But there was no turning back, not now. Moore's warning echoed in my ears, but I shoved it aside. I had come too far. My pursuit of Jamie's fate had led me to this moment. The Black Veil wasn't just a conspiracy, it was real, and it was bigger than anything I had ever imagined. My gut told me that the key to understanding what had happened to my sibling lay in the decaying heart of the town itself, in the place most had long since forgotten. I turned left down an unpaved road that slithered through the outskirts of Ashwood, away from the town center. The rain picked up, and the wind began to howl, sending the leaves of the scattered trees dancing in the shadows like ghosts. The narrow road twisted and bent, leading me deeper into the woods, far from the eyes of the townsfolk who preferred to remain ignorant of what happened when the harvest festival came. The farther I went, the more isolated the world around me became. The trees stretched out, their branches gnarled and blackened, leaning inward as though conspiring to block out the light. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind, the creak of a branch swaying under its own weight. My breath came in short, sharp bursts, my heart racing as I followed the overgrown path. And then I saw it. Through the veil of trees, half hidden by the skeletal arms of the surrounding forest, I caught sight of the church. The old stone structure seemed to emerge from the earth itself, ancient and imposing, like some malignant tumor. Its dark silhouette was a stark contrast to the pale, rain-drenched sky. It loomed in front of me like a forgotten monument to something long dead, but its very existence screamed of secrets buried deep within its walls. The church was a ruin, its once proud spires now crumbled and jagged, reaching toward the heavens like broken fingers. The stone was covered in moss and lichen, slick with moisture, making the place look as though it had been swallowed by the earth itself, slowly reclaimed by time. The windows, once colorful with stained glass, were shattered or missing entirely, leaving gaping holes that looked like empty eyes. There was a heaviness in the air here, something oppressive that made my skin prickle, like the weight of centuries pressing down on me with every breath. I stepped closer, my boots sinking into the muddy ground as the rain turned the dirt path into a slick, treacherous mire. The church doors hung ajar, warped and swollen with age, as if they hadn't been opened in decades. I hesitated for a moment, the flickering light of my flashlight casting long shadows across the entryway. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to turn back and never return to this place. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound reverberating through the empty air like a warning. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, and the atmosphere was suffocating. Dust hung in the air like a fine mist, and the floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I moved deeper into the darkened church. The faint light from my flashlight danced across the room, illuminating the broken pews and shattered remnants of what had once been a place of worship. The walls, once adorned with intricate carvings and holy symbols, were now smeared with something dark, something that could have been blood, or something far worse. The smell of decay was overpowering, and my stomach churned. At the far end of the church, where the altar once stood, there was an eerie stillness. A large, circular symbol was painted on the floor, its edges frayed and worn with age. It was crude, unholy, and it sent a shiver down my spine. The symbol was made up of jagged lines and arcane shapes, the kind of design that felt wrong just by looking at it. The very sight of it twisted something deep within me, like the room itself was shifting around me, warping under the influence of whatever dark force had taken root here. My breath quickened, and I took a step forward, drawn toward the center of the room where the symbol lay. The floor beneath me creaked ominously, and I froze, listening to the sounds of the church. My ears strained to catch any movement in the silence. For a moment, I thought I heard something. Faint whispers, perhaps, echoing from the corners of the church. But when I turned my head, all I saw was the darkness pressing in from every angle. My eyes returned to the symbol, and as I gazed down at it, a strange compulsion tugged at me. The feeling was immediate, familiar, yet foreign. I had to understand what it meant. I had to know. I crouched down, running my fingers along the edge of the design, feeling the cold, damp stone beneath my fingertips. As I traced the lines, a chill ran up my spine, and suddenly, I was no longer alone. From the shadows there came a sound, soft, like the rustle of fabric. I snapped my head up, my flashlight trembling in my grip as I scanned the room. I was sure I hadn't imagined it. Someone, or something, was there. The air shifted, and the faintest movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. In the shadows at the back of the altar there was a figure standing, cloaked in black. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then the figure moved, a slow, deliberate step forward. Its presence was almost suffocating, as if the very air thickened with its arrival. It was as if the darkness itself had taken shape. My breath hitched in my chest. I stood frozen, unable to look away as the figure stepped into the dim light. The hood of its cloak was pulled low, but the air around it seemed to shimmer with an unnatural energy. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw something, just the faintest hint of a face, pale and twisted, lurking beneath the shadow. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone, slipping back into the darkness, vanishing without a trace. My pulse raced, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The room was empty once more, save for the broken altar and the lingering presence of something ancient and hungry. My body moved on instinct as I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever had been here, whatever had watched me, was not human, and it had been waiting for me. With one last glance at the symbol on the floor, I turned and fled, the echoes of my footsteps lost in the vast, empty space behind me. Outside, the rain was still falling, the world heavy with the weight of what I had just discovered. The church was no longer a place of solace. It was a tomb, a dark shrine to something far beyond my understanding. But it was also a clue, a piece of the puzzle I had been searching for. The black veil was real, and whatever waited inside that abandoned church was far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The air had turned dense, thick with the weight of something ancient and oppressive as I made my way back to the church. The storm had passed, but the skies were heavy with the promise of another. The streets of Ashwood were eerily empty, as though the town itself had shrunk back into the shadows, hiding from whatever was brewing beneath its surface. My breath came in ragged bursts as I retraced my steps, the memory of the figure in the church still sharp in my mind. It had felt like an omen, something far more sinister than just a cloaked figure lurking in the dark. As I approached the church, its silhouette loomed against the pale light of the overcast sky. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand at attention. There was something wrong about this place, something so deeply unsettling that it seemed to cling to the air around me. The closer I got, the more my senses screamed in warning, but my determination overpowered my fear. Jamie's disappearance, the black veil, the eldritch forces bound within these very walls. I couldn't leave without answers, no matter the cost. The church door creaked open on its own, as if it had been expecting me. The smell of decay and dampness hit me immediately, a familiar sting in my nose. I stepped inside, the eerie quiet pressing in around me like a vice. The shadows seemed deeper than before, thicker, alive with a strange energy that sent a tremor through my spine. I moved deeper into the nave, my flashlight flicking across the remnants of stained glass, now shattered and jagged like a broken dream. The altar loomed ahead, the floor beneath it marred with the same strange symbol I had seen earlier, only now it seemed alive, pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm. And then, from the darkness, the voice came, a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around me, as though the walls themselves were singing. "You shouldn't have come here." The words slithered through the air, cold and seductive, curling around me like smoke. I froze, my flashlight cutting through the shadows in vain as the temperature in the room dropped sharply. The sound of my heartbeat hammered in my ears, but I steeled myself, stepping forward. From the shadows emerged the figure I had been dreading, the High Priestess. She was impossibly beautiful, her presence overwhelming. Dressed in flowing black robes, her long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders like a river of ink. Her face was pale, almost ethereal, but it was her eyes that drew me in. Violet, glowing faintly in the dark, as if they held all the secrets of the universe within them. There was an unnatural stillness to her movements, as though she were both of this world and not. "Alex Harper," she said, her voice a gentle lilt that carried both power and coldness. "I've been expecting you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with an unsettling truth. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, but I swallowed it, my voice steady as I responded. "You took my sibling," I said, my words more of a statement than a question. "Jamie, you took them, for your ritual, and I want to know why." The High Priestess smiled, but it was not a smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile that promised pain, that promised truths better left untouched. She tilted her head, studying me with an almost predatory curiosity. "Ah, yes, your sister. You didn't know, did you? She wasn't taken by accident, she was chosen." My heart stopped for a beat, a cold, sickening realization spreading through my chest. "Chosen?" My voice barely made it past my lips. The High Priestess nodded slowly, her eyes gleaming. "The Black Veil does not sacrifice at random, Alex. We do not choose the weak or the innocent. No, we choose those who are destined to serve the Ancient Ones. Those who are born to feed them, to ensure their power remains bound to this world." I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. "Born to feed them? What are you talking about? What are you really?" I demanded, stepping closer, though every instinct screamed at me to turn and run. The High Priestess's lips parted in a thin, almost mocking smile. "We are not human, Alex, not in the way you understand it. We serve something far older, something far more powerful than your petty human existence. The Black Veil is but a vessel for these beings, ancient and bound to the earth by sacrifices made through time. Every year, we offer up the Chosen One. This keeps the power contained, keeps them from breaking free." Her voice dropped lower, the cadence of it shifting, becoming more hypnotic, almost like a chant. "You are here now, aren't you? Just like Jamie, chosen in your own way, driven by guilt, by an insatiable thirst for truth. You've come seeking answers, but all you will find is the truth of the veil, and the price it demands." My legs felt like they were turning to stone. I felt the suffocating weight of the room pressing against my chest, my thoughts swirling in chaos. I wanted to deny it, to reject the impossible, but deep down, I understood. Everything, the strange disappearance, the cryptic warnings, the eerie rituals, it had all been leading to this moment. You're not human," I whispered, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "None of you are." The High Priestess's smile widened, her violet eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Correct. We are the vessels, the conduits between this world and the Ancient Ones. You think Jamie's fate was a mistake? She was meant to be the next sacrifice to bind their power. And now, you're here to witness it firsthand, to join us in keeping the gates closed, or, perhaps, open them. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. What do you mean? What do you want from me? The High Priestess stepped closer, her presence overwhelming, a shadow swallowing me whole. You are the final piece of the puzzle, Alex. Your guilt, your obsession with the truth, it makes you perfect for this. You are the one who will make the ritual complete. You will be the final sacrifice, or you will be the one to set them free. My breath caught in my throat. The High Priestess moved even closer, her voice a soft whisper that tickled the back of my mind. Make your choice, Alex. Join us and be reborn, a servant of the Ancient Ones, or leave here and watch the world unravel as they are released. The shadows behind the High Priestess seemed to shift, twisting, their forms taking shape like slithering tendrils of darkness. The very walls of the church began to groan and shake, as though the earth itself was protesting. I knew with terrible certainty that if I stayed any longer, I would be lost. With a desperate, gut-wrenching cry, I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the cold, cracked floor as the High Priestess's laughter echoed through the church, soft, mocking, and unyielding. The fog had thickened once again by the time the harvest festival began. It clung to the streets like a living thing, creeping through every crevice, obscuring the town square with a veil of mist so dense it felt as though Ashwood itself was being swallowed whole. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the flickering lanterns lining the streets cast long, distorted shadows across the cobbled paths. The town was alive, but it wasn't the lively cheer of a celebration. It was the kind of life that felt forced, as if the people were moving through a dream they couldn't wake from. I stood at the edge of the square, my heart hammering in my chest, my hands cold with fear. I had followed the trail of clues here, each step leading me closer to the truth. The Black Veil was preparing for its ritual tonight, and tonight it was going to claim another victim, one who would join the ranks of those who had vanished before. The square was bustling with activity, but there was something fundamentally wrong about it all. The townspeople wore masks of feigned joy, moving with an unnerving precision. The sound of distant laughter echoed, but it was hollow, empty of the true spirit of festivity. Vendors sold strange, exotic fruits, their colors unnaturally vibrant under the lantern light. The music from the fiddlers in the corner was discordant, the notes jagged and unsettling. The air buzzed with an energy that wasn't human, a low hum that vibrated in the pit of my stomach. A chill ran through me as I realized something. The town itself was participating in the ritual. Every person, every movement, was a part of the design, an offering, an unwitting pawn in the dark game of the Black Veil. I stepped forward, barely noticing the people I passed as my gaze remained fixed on the church looming at the far side of the square. The doors were open now, wide and inviting, though I knew better than to step inside. I didn't need to. I could feel the pull, like an invisible hand drawing me toward it, toward the heart of the nightmare I had been running from. And then I saw them, the cloaked figures who had been there in the shadows of the church. Now they were out in the open, moving through the crowd with a grace that was both unsettling and predatory. Their black robes fluttered behind them like the wings of some dark bird, their faces hidden beneath hoods that seemed to swallow the light. There were more of them now than I had ever seen, their presence like a cancer in the heart of the town. At the center of the square, near the fountain that had long since stopped flowing, A massive bonfire had been built. The flames crackled and roared, casting an eerie orange glow across the square. People gathered around it, forming a circle, their faces expressionless, their eyes vacant. My breath caught in my throat as I spotted the symbol I had seen earlier. The same jagged lines, the same arcane shapes, painted across the ground in a wide, perfect circle around the fire. The high priestess stood at the center of it all, her eyes gleaming in the dark, her voice carrying like a spell as she spoke to the crowd. The people around her stood in a trance, their bodies swaying slightly as though they were caught in the rhythm of her words. We gather tonight, in the name of the Ancient Ones, to honor the bond that keeps them bound. Their power is our power. Their strength is our strength. The high priestess's voice rang out, sweet and hypnotic, like the call of a siren. She raised her hands high, and the crowd fell silent, their collective breath held. I felt the pull again, stronger this time, as though something were reaching out from the fire, from the earth itself. The energy in the air crackled, thick and heavy, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to hum with a low, primal vibration. This wasn't a celebration. This was a ritual. The high priestess's eyes turned to meet mine, her smile both knowing and sad. "You've come at last," she said, her voice almost a whisper but carrying across the square like a command. "You understand now, don't you? This is the night of reckoning, the final act. The world will change. The old ways will return." I tried to move, but my body felt as if it were frozen to the spot. The force of the ritual was overwhelming, like a tide crashing against me, pushing me toward the fire, toward the center of the circle. The chanting began then, soft at first, but slowly building in intensity, like the roar of a distant storm. The people around the bonfire raised their arms, joining in, their voices melding together into a singular hypnotic sound that filled the square with a bone-deep resonance. Suddenly, there was movement in the center of the circle. My heart lurched in my chest as I saw Jamie. My sibling, pale and wide-eyed, was being led into the center of the circle by two of the Black Veil's acolytes. They had Jamie bound, their arms pulled behind them, forcing them to their knees in front of the bonfire. The flickering flames cast strange, grotesque shadows across Jamie's face, making them look almost unrecognizable. But it was Jamie. My stomach twisted painfully as I realized the truth. The ritual had begun. Jamie had been the chosen one all along. I took a step forward, but my legs felt weak, my vision swimming. The high priestess's eyes never left me, and I could feel the weight of her gaze like a physical force. "You cannot stop this," the high priestess said, her voice low and rich with dark power. "It is already too late. You were meant to be a part of this, Alex. You always were." My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, my mind screaming for me to do something, anything. But the signal was gone. I was cut off from the outside world, trapped within the confines of the town, the ritual, the festival. And then it happened. The high priestess raised her arms high once more, and the chanting reached a fever pitch. The fire flared suddenly, its flames twisting and coiling like serpents, and I felt a searing heat wash over my skin. My eyes were drawn to the flames, my vision narrowing, until the world around me seemed to blur. A low, rumbling sound filled the air. The ground shook beneath my feet, and the sky above seemed to crack open with thunder, though no clouds moved in the sky. There was no lightning, just the deep, rumbling presence of something vast, something hungry, stirring beneath the earth. With a sudden, violent jerk, the fire surged higher, consuming the center of the circle. The flames seemed to twist, taking shape, rising into a massive, writhing form, an entity made of flame and shadow. The people around the fire fell to their knees, their faces contorted in rapture and fear. and in that moment I understood. The Black Veil wasn't just a cult. It was a ritual to keep these ancient entities bound, to keep them from tearing through the fabric of reality itself. Jamie was not the sacrifice. They were the key. And as the flames reached toward the sky, I realized with terrifying clarity, I had come here to witness the opening of the gates, the breaking of the veil. And soon, it would be my turn to play a part in the ritual. The world around me erupted in chaos, and the town of Ashwood was no longer mine. The flames rose higher, twisting and curling in an unnatural dance as though alive, reaching toward the sky with a hunger I could almost feel in my bones. The fire roared, a deafening cacophony that drowned out everything else. The murmurs of the townsfolk, the rhythmic chant of the Black Veil, even my own thoughts. There was only the fire, the heat, and the pull of something ancient, something far darker than the town could ever have known. My heart hammered in my chest, my body frozen in place. My hands were clammy, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts as I stood at the edge of the circle, helpless. The town square had transformed into something alien, a sacred ground where the veil between the living and the otherworldly had grown thin, where the boundaries between life and death blurred. And Jamie was at the center, their form now a trembling figure in front of the fire, the flames licking at their skin like hungry tongues. But it wasn't just Jamie who was at the mercy of the ritual, and then I felt it. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air. It wasn't just the ritual that had begun, I had been caught in it too. The High Priestess's voice rang out like a bell, clear and sharp over the rising chaos, and my pulse skipped a beat as her eyes met mine. She smiled, a smile so full of terrible understanding that my stomach twisted. "It's time, Alex." The words were soft, but laced with a cruel certainty. They lingered in the air, wrapping around me like a vine, pulling me toward the center of the fire. The cold wind whipped through the square, ruffling my hair, but the heat from the bonfire seemed to grow colder, sharper, like ice carving through my chest. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Surely, I was mistaken. I had come to find answers for Jamie, to stop the ritual, to save them. This wasn't supposed to be my fate. I wasn't supposed to be here in the center of this madness. But even as I tried to push the thought away, it stuck to me like tar, the crushing reality seeping into my bones. The High Priestess stepped forward, her robes flowing around her like ink spilling into water. She approached me with that same otherworldly grace, her violet eyes gleaming in the firelight. There was no mercy in her gaze, only the cold certainty of one who knew what was to come. "It's always been you, Alex." Her voice was a whisper now, a breath on the wind, yet it felt like it was inside my head, reverberating in my skull. Your search for Jamie, your guilt, your obsession with the truth, it was never about saving them. It was about bringing you here, to me, to us. My throat went dry, the weight of my guilt, my pursuit of the truth, crashing down on me all at once. I wanted to scream, to shout out for help, to run, but my legs were rooted to the ground, my body betraying me as the ritual's pull grew stronger, deeper. It was as if the town itself were pulling me in, its heartbeat syncing with mine. The High Priestess raised her hand, and with that small gesture the fire crackled, a low, guttural sound rising from the depths of the earth. My gaze snapped to Jamie, who was still kneeling in the center of the circle, their eyes wide with terror, their body trembling. Jamie's lips parted, but no sound came out, and it was as though the world held its breath, waiting. "You've always been a part of this, Alex. You've always belonged to us. The Black Veil doesn't simply choose its sacrifices, it chooses its vessels. You were born into this like all who come before you, and tonight, the final piece falls into place. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. "No!" My voice cracked, the word a desperate plea that fell on deaf ears. This can't be true." But even as I said it, I felt the truth, dark and inevitable, sinking into me, winding around my thoughts, twisting them until there was nothing left but the awful reality that Jamie's fate had never been the issue. I was the one they had been waiting for. I was the one the Black Veil had been grooming all along. My search for Jamie was not a quest to find them, but a path that had led me straight into the arms of the eldritch entities the society served. A low, rumbling hum filled the air, growing louder with every passing second, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath my feet. The High Priestess's voice cut through the sound, more insistent now. "You can feel it, can't you? The pull, the power, the truth. It's in your blood, Alex. You are the one who will complete the cycle, the one who will open the gate. It's time. You will be our herald. You will walk among them, carry their message, and in return, we will give you the power you crave, the knowledge you seek, the truth you've always wanted to uncover." My breath hitched, my head swimming. The truth I had so desperately sought was not what I had imagined. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't about saving my sibling or stopping a dark cult. It was about being part of something much bigger, something far more terrifying and uncontrollable than I could have ever fathomed. And now, there was no escape. I felt a surge of dread rise in my chest, a wave of fear that threatened to drown me. The fire before me flared, and I saw it, them, rising in the flames. A vast, shifting shape of pure darkness, like the very void itself had come alive, its edges flickering and crackling with power. Its eyes were vast, unblinking, and as they fixed on me, I knew with a certainty that shattered my soul. This was it, the end, the beginning. The High Priestess reached out, her fingers brushing my cheek in a touch so cold, it felt like the very breath of death. "It's done," she whispered. "You are ours now." And then, in a sudden and overwhelming rush, the power that had been building inside me exploded. It was as if the ground beneath me gave way, and I was falling, plummeting into a vast, unknown void. My body shook violently, my mind screaming for release, but it was no use. The entities had chosen. The veil had been torn open, and I, Alex Harper, once a journalist, once a sister, was no longer myself. I had become their messenger, their herald. The world around me blurred, twisted, and then, in a flash of agonizing clarity, I understood. This was not just the end of Ashwood. This was the beginning of something far worse. I had freed them, and now they would walk among the living. The town, the ritual, my own soul, none of it mattered anymore. The world would never be the same. The world around me was collapsing. It wasn't just the town that was crumbling, it was reality itself, unraveling thread by thread. The flames from the bonfire stretched into the sky like impossibly long fingers, and the earth beneath my feet trembled with the force of something ancient, something alive and hungry. I could feel the ground vibrate beneath me, a low hum pulsing from the center of the square, radiating out like the heartbeat of a being far greater than anything human. The High Priestess stood at the center of it all, her arms raised high, her violet eyes glowing with unnatural power. Around her, the townspeople knelt, their faces drawn, their bodies trembling as the eldritch entities, those vast, unknowable horrors, began to tear through the very fabric of reality. The fire seemed to twist and grow, its shape shifting, now rising like a blackened vortex, now curling inward like a living thing. And in the middle of it all, I was trapped. My body ached, every fiber of my being screaming to escape, to run, to stop this madness before it consumed everything I knew. But the truth, an overwhelming, suffocating truth, pressed down on me. I was the key. I had unwittingly opened the door to this nightmare, and now there was no going back. The entities were free, and the world would never be the same. But even as the power of the ritual surged around me, a spark of defiance ignited within me. I couldn't accept this. I wouldn't. No matter the cost, no matter the horror. The High Priestess's voice rang out, a command and a prophecy all in one. You are ours now, Alex. You've opened the gate. There is no turning back. The words struck like a physical blow, but my mind raced. I was no longer the terrified, confused journalist I had been when I first arrived in Ashwood. I had seen the truth, understood the enormity of what I had done. But there was still a flicker of myself left. The woman who had promised to protect my sibling, who had vowed to uncover the dark secrets buried in this cursed town. I wasn't ready to be swallowed whole by the ancient darkness. I wasn't ready to become just another servant of the eldritch gods. The fire behind the High Priestess seemed to grow, the air around it thick with an unnatural energy. The flame twisted again, this time forming shapes, faces, eyes, hands, grotesque shapes of dark energy and smoke reaching toward the living. My chest tightened, and I felt a surge of panic flood through my veins. The Black Veil had always been a part of my story, but now it was my story no longer. It had consumed me, twisted my fate. But as I stood there, my heart racing, my breath shallow, something deep inside me screamed, no, not like this, not at the hands of these monstrous forces. The ground beneath my feet shuddered again, and in that moment of vulnerability a thought pierced my mind. The recorder. The one piece of technology I had carried with me, the one object that had documented the truth, the ritual, and the entities that haunted this place. My breath hitched as I pulled it from my bag, my fingers shaking. I had forgotten about it in the midst of the madness, but now it was my only hope, the only way to expose what was happening here. The High Priestess saw the movement and tilted her head, a smile curling at the corner of her lips. You think that will stop us? That will change nothing. But I didn't care. I turned the recorder on, the red light flashing as it began to record, and my voice came out, strained but resolute. This is Alex Harper, the Black Veil, the ritual, it's real. The eldritch entities are free. This town will burn if we don't stop them. The High Priestess has betrayed us all. As my voice echoed out into the night, the power around me faltered, just for a moment. The entities, the fire, the very air seemed to hesitate, like something had disrupted the unnatural flow of energy. My eyes widened in realization. The truth was a weapon. I wasn't going to let them silence me. I wasn't going to let them win. But then, with a scream that rattled the bones of the earth itself, the fire surged again, its flames tearing toward me, its hunger insatiable. The High Priestess's eyes burned with fury as the entities began to manifest more fully, their tendrils reaching out, stretching through the cracks in reality, pulling the world into a horrific new form. You think you can stop us with your words, Alex? You've already opened the door. There's no going back. With one last, desperate motion, I tossed the recorder into the fire. The flames swallowed it instantly, the hiss of it being consumed almost drowned out by the roar of the entities, the earth trembling beneath my feet. And then, the world fractured. The ground beneath me cracked wide open. The night sky tore open in jagged ribbons, and the sound of the fire and the chanting twisted into something unrecognizable. An ancient scream, an invitation, a warning. Reality itself seemed to rip, as though the very fabric of existence was unraveling. The people in the circle, their bodies contorting and twisting, were consumed by the darkness, their forms dissolving into nothingness. Ashwood itself seemed to collapse in on itself, the buildings crumbling, the land sinking into the earth like a dying star. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, my body trembling with the aftershocks of the ritual's power. My vision blurred, and the earth beneath my feet cracked open, but I forced myself to move. There was no time to think, no time to process. I had to escape. I had to run. But as I turned, something caught my gaze. Jamie. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw them standing there, standing tall in the center of the square, their eyes dark and empty, as if they had never been part of my world at all. But as I blinked, they were gone, swallowed by the smoke, lost in the chaos of the collapsing town. The entities were free, but so was I. My mind screamed, but no words came. I couldn't go back to the world I had known. I couldn't return to the life I had left behind. I had opened the door, and now, as I ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty, dying streets, I realized the awful truth. The black veil had not been destroyed. It had only been released. The recorder was gone. The truth was out. The entities were free, but I was no longer just a witness. I was their herald, and the world would never be the same. The sun had set, but the world outside was no longer bathed in the warm glow of evening. Instead, an unnatural twilight stretched across the horizon, gray, bruised, and heavy with the weight of what had transpired. Ashwood was gone. The town had sunk into the earth, swallowed whole by the forces I had unleashed. What was once a place of familiar streets, of childhood memories, was now nothing more than a scar on the land, a dark, yawning wound in the fabric of reality. But I couldn't stop running. My legs carried me through the wilderness that had once been the outskirts of the town. The trees, now twisted and broken, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching toward the heavens. The sky itself seemed to pulse with a sickly glow, as if the stars had dimmed in fear of the ancient forces now walking the earth. I didn't know where I was going. I couldn't think. All I could do was run, my breath ragged, my mind a blur of panic, guilt, and the growing understanding of the horrible truth. They're free. The words echoed in my head, relentless, as if they had been branded into my very soul. I had opened the door, unwittingly, but now the consequences were clear. The Black Veil wasn't a secret society. It wasn't just some cult performing dark rituals in the shadows of the town. It had been the barrier, the binding force that kept the eldritch entities locked away. And now, those entities had escaped. The world had begun to shift, the laws of nature and reality warping under the weight of their power. The land seemed to tremble, the air thick with an otherworldly energy that made my skin crawl. I could hear whispers in the wind, voices not of the living, but of something much older, much darker. The truth was no longer just a story. It was a nightmare, and I was its unwilling messenger. I reached a small clearing, my legs finally giving out beneath me as I collapsed to my knees. The ground felt cold against my skin, the earth seeming to pulse with a strange, rhythmic beat, like a heartbeat that wasn't my own. My breath came in jagged, shallow gasps as I pressed my hands to the ground, trying to steady myself. But there was no peace to be found. The world was unraveling, and I was at its center. For a long moment, there was only the sound of my ragged breath, the only reminder of my humanity in a world that had begun to lose its grip on reality. Then, a whisper, like a soft breeze stirring through the trees, seemed to surround me. Alex. My body tensed, and I froze. The voice was so familiar, but not quite right, too distant, too cold. I looked around, but there was no one there, no sign of movement. But the voice lingered, curling around me like smoke, whispering my name again. Alex, come to us. My heart hammered in my chest, panic seizing my throat as I scrambled to my feet. I spun in every direction, but still no one was there. And then, the earth beneath me began to shift again, a low rumble building in the ground. The sky darkened, the swirling clouds above thickening, swirling together like a storm that had no end. Alex, we have been waiting. It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a presence, pressing in from every direction, surrounding me with its weight. The air itself seemed to hum with its power, a pressure in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. And then, out of the shadows of the trees, the high priestess stepped forward. Her pale, beautiful face was as serene as ever, but her eyes were different. They gleamed with the light of the ancient entities, an otherworldly fire that flickered beneath the surface, far darker than I had ever seen before. The high priestess smiled, her lips curving in a way that held no warmth. You've run long enough, Alex. It is time to accept your place. Her voice was soft, but it reverberated in the air, as though the earth itself was carrying her words. I staggered back, my heart pounding. No, I gasped, shaking my head. I won't join you. I won't be a part of this. The high priestess took a step forward, and the world seemed to bend with her movement, the trees warping around her like the air itself was alive. You have no choice. You opened the gate. You freed them. You are the herald, Alex. She stepped closer, her smile widening. We are the ones who chose you. You sought the truth, and now you will carry it to the world. You will tell them of what you have unleashed, and they will listen. My legs trembled as I stepped backward, the ground beneath me shifting as if it were no longer solid. The whispers filled my mind, the voices of the eldritch beings, stretching out from the cracks in the world, their presence suffocating and overwhelming. I felt a deep, unnatural pull toward the high priestess, toward the figures that emerged from the dark corners of the world, the entities that had once been bound but were now free. No, I whispered, my voice shaking with fear. No, I won't do this. I won't. But the high priestess only smiled. You already are, Alex. You always were. You are not the one who will stop them. You are the one who will bring them into the world. I staggered back again, my hands trembling as I gripped the nearest tree for support. The sky above seemed to split open with a sound like thunder, and the air was filled with the power of the entities that had been waiting for this moment. I could feel them now, cold, ancient, vast, and in that moment I understood the terrible truth. The Black Veil had never been a force to protect the town. It had been a conduit, a channel through which these ancient entities could bind themselves to the world. And I was the one who had torn the veil wide open. The high priestess reached out, her fingers brushing my cheek with a chill that went straight to my bones. You will walk among them now. You will spread their message. You will be the herald who guides them back to this world, and you will see the destruction they bring with their return. The last shred of my resistance crumbled. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run away, but the presence of the entities was suffocating. I had no choice. I could feel their cold grip on me, their voices in my head, whispering their terrible promises. My vision blurred, and I saw the world around me stretch, distort, as though the very air was breaking apart. The forest, the sky, even my own body seemed to ripple like a fractured mirror, and in that moment I felt myself becoming something else, something other. I was no longer just Alex Harper, the journalist, the sister, the woman seeking the truth. I had become a vessel, a living conduit for the power of the Ancient Ones. And the truth, the terrifying, horrifying truth, would be mine to carry. The high priestess stepped back, her form merging with the shadows, her voice fading into the wind. Go now, herald. Let the world hear your call. And as the world unraveled around me, I, Alex Harper, the unwilling herald, began to walk.